Welcome, everyone. My name is Deborah Dunleavy, and I am the author of Unsayable Absence. I'm doing this video today because I invited my friends to come to a Zoom preview of the book, and I really messed it up. So I'm going to do the program all over again in hopes that I can share it with you in the future. I'd like to thank the Writers Union of Canada for making it possible for me to do this Zoom launch. It's a preview launch. The real launch will take place later on in June of 2022. Today, I want to talk about three main things. I want to talk about the inspiration, why it was that I wrote Unsayable Absence. And I also want to talk about the research, because there was a tremendous amount of research that went into it, and about the characters and their relationships. I'm going to start with something of a personal story. My mother told me what it was like when she was a little girl, and her father worked on a drill boat called the J.B. King. The J.B. King was dredging a channel through the St. Lawrence River, dredging a channel years before the Seaway. This was 1930. It started to blast its way up the river at the most eastern end of the Thousand Islands. On one day in June 26, 1930 to be exact, a sudden storm came up and a bolt of lightning hit the drill boat, setting off 2 tons of dynamite, and over 40 men lost their lives, including my grandfather, Jack Wiley Sr. My grandmother, who was Bertha May Green before she got married, my grandmother went into shock, I have been told, and had to be hospitalized. No one said where, but I began to wonder, could it have been the Brockville Asylum? And that inspired me to write the story of a woman whose husband is gone. So I'm just going to read the beginning of the book for you. July 1930. What day is it? The morning light creeps across the floor. Voices seep into the room from outside. Una walks over to the 3rd floor window on her ward and peers through the cold metal bars. Below, several patients, all men, pull weeds with their bare hands. Others break up clumps of earth with their spades. One man in a straw hat waters the new summer crop with a long garden hose. Did I water my plants? She glances beyond the trees, mostly oak, some maple, to where the grounds of the asylum slope toward the cliff that hovers over the river. It all seems strangely serene to Una. Today, there is no breeze to dance in the leaves, and the river looks as clear as glass. But tomorrow, the river might rage like a monster. Don't trust the river. Again, Una hears the men muttering, secrets, lies, profanities. Their garden hose is much smaller than the one they use on us, much smaller. The nurse tells us lies. Water therapy, she says, is good for you. You'll feel better. The sting of the water does not make Una feel better. Last week, the explosion from the hose knocked a patient over. If she could, she would tell someone how the nurse ties them to the chairs. No one will listen to me. No one. Una is the only one who hears the aching that stays stuck in her throat. The psychiatrist wanted to say something, anything, but Una has no words to spill from her heart. No words that will bring her husband back to her. That is just the beginning of the novel, and then it goes right back to when Una is a little girl, living on a scow, a flat barge on the Lake of Bays near Huntsville, Ontario. I started to be very interested in my grandmother's life in the early 1970s when I was a student at York University. It was at the height of the women's liberation movement, and I began to reflect upon my grandmother's life and how, in the first 3 decades of the 20th century, she experienced some incredible changes in the role of women in society. The suffragette movement was happening. There was the First World War, and my grandmother worked in a munitions factory. The character that my grandmother inspired is Una Campbell. We meet Una as a little girl on the scow where she lives with her mother Maud and her father Duncan. In my own personal grandparents' story, my grandmother didn't get along with her mother, my great-grandmother, and so I put that flavor into the book. And my great-grandfather, apparently, he used to tipple a little bit, and he'd be at the local tavern, and my grandmother would have to go and fetch him. So that also appears in the work of fiction. In those early years, up to about the age of 12 in the book, the most influential character is Rachel Littlefeathers. I created Rachel Littlefeathers, a Chippewa, as she would have been called then, a Chippewa woman, because I wanted to pay respect to my own great-grandmother on my father's side, who called herself an Indian, and I have her DNA, but I don't have her story. So I wanted to create a story about Rachel Littlefeathers. I did a tremendous amount of research. Believe me, I wanted to be respectful and to honor what had happened to the Chippewa people living in the Muskoka area and how they were displaced people, their lands taken from them, given to the settlers, and they were sent, many were sent to live in a place called the Indian Village. Around the age of 12, my character Una is sent to the village of Baysville on an errand. And that's when she meets Eva Stanton. Eva Stanton lives alone. She is a self-made woman, highly educated and eccentric. She is a suffragette and she is an herbalist. She teaches Una the more refined aspects of life and encourages her love for music. When the First World War breaks out, and I've got my poppy on today, thinking of the First World War and the Second World War, and other wars, of course, but when the First World War breaks out in the novel, her brothers enlist, and that would be Colin and Robert. And Una feels it is her responsibility to somehow contribute to the war effort at home, and she goes to work in a she goes to work in a munitions factory just north of Parry Sound. But before we get there, I just want to go back a little bit, if you don't mind. I want to go back and read an important passage between Maud, her mother, on the scow when she's still a little girl. I'm just going to read that for you. July 1907. So Una is about 6-7 years old here. On this bright summer morning, Una is glad to get out of the cramped, humid quarters of the log cabin her father has erected on the scow. Each April, her family leaves the winter cabin some 3 miles inland and moves to the scow until the snow flies in October. During those chilly spring months, Una wears all of her clothes to bed to chase the shivers away. But this morning, Una is already hot from the summer heat. She steps out of the cabin wearing only a thin cotton slip. She wanders over to the edge of the scow and dangles her feet in the cool morning water of the lake. She keeps them as still as possible so that the sunfish kiss her toes. In the distance, a mist rises from the water toward the warming sun. A magical morning. Fetch the water. Una's mother holds a small knife in one hand, the body of the rabbit in the other, and blood dripping from her hands. Don't stand there staring. Go. Una grabs the bucket from beside the gutting table and dips it over the edge of the scow. Water sloshes over the top, heavy. The handle nearly slips from her fingers. She grabs it just in time. With both hands and all her strength, she hauls it out of the lake. Bring it here, Una. Now watch. One day you will be doing this yourself. Maud is visibly pregnant with her 8th child. She swore that Una would be her last. Her 2 sons and another girl, all older than Una, had survived childbirth. 3 other infants had only lived for a few brief moments. I can do it for you, Mama. I helped Nokomis gut the rabbit. Maud's jaw clenches as she inserts her 2 fingers through the tiny slit of the rabbit's belly and pulls the skin apart. You spend too much time with that woman. Una knows better than to remind her mother that she is the one who always sends her to be with Rachel Littlefeathers. Yes, Mama, but we skinned a rabbit last week. I helped. I can help you. You can help me by doing what you're told. So that is the uncomfortable relationship that Una has with her own mother and why she spends so much time with Nokomis, which does mean grandmother and Anishinaabe. And as I told you, she later visits Eva Stanton and learns a lot about growing up. And now we find that she's gone to a munitions factory. And at the munitions factory, she nurtures many friendships, especially with Emily Findlay. And there's Maisie and many other young women all working there during the war years. Now, I'm going to tell you a bit more of my family's history. My grandfather, Jack Wiley Sr., he enlisted with the 228th Battalion, and in Canada, they were known as the Northern Fusiliers. The name changed when they went overseas. They were a railway troop. They also had a hockey team that dressed in khaki uniforms and did these exhibition games against teams like the Quebec Bulldogs to raise awareness for the war effort. My grandfather wasn't one of the hockey players, but in Unsayable Absence, a young hockey player who is a member of the Northern Fusiliers is named Angus McFadden. And he's playing hockey in Parry Sound when a group of the gals from the munition factory go to see the exhibition game. And then this novel becomes a love story. You'll have to read it to find out how and what happened. Eventually, Angus gets sent overseas, and the 2 of them write back and forth to each other. So I'm going to read you one of the letters that was sent. Let's see. I have this all noted over here, page 187. Here it is. August 12th, 1917. My lovely girl, your letters are worth more than treasures of gold to me. There has been little time to write. I hope you can forgive me. I keep your lock of hair close to my heart, and I want you to know that I yearn to hold you in my arms and tell you just how much you mean to me, my dear girl. You are one of a kind, precious in so many ways. We have been under attack more times than I can tell you, but I remain safe. Sometimes I think I have an angel watching over me. Everywhere I look is a sea of mud. And by God, if we can lay a track here, we might as well lay a track across the ocean. I have befriended a mongrel I found near an abandoned village. He's a good little buddy and stays by my side at night, probably because I give him some of my grub. I call him Lucky. I too think about what to do when I get home, and I hope that whatever it is, it will be with you, my love. Chin up, my darling. I will see you one day soon. Love, Angus. And there are many letters back and forth in the book between Una and Angus. I don't know how my grandparents met. I don't know what it was that, or how, I should say, I don't know how it was that they ended up in Cape Real, except that my grandfather worked for the railroad. But in the novel, Una goes up even before Angus returns from overseas. She goes and lives with Edith and Charlie. Edith is Angus's sister. They live in a boxcar. They live in a converted boxcar. In fact, in my own grandmother's life, she lived in a boxcar, and that's where my mother was born, in a boxcar. Una is lonely. She's disillusioned. She doesn't like it, so remote and so removed. And eventually she befriends the musical director of the local church. His name, of course, I'm just going to look it up. I wrote the book. I got to look it up. Anyway, Archie, of course, it's Archie. She meets Archie. And I'm not going to tell you about their relationship. You're going to have to read the book to find that out. But she and Archie Brentwood become the best of friends. And Archie has a little music ensemble. Of course, Una is musically inclined. And they start playing for little dances around Cape Real. And on this one particular occasion, they have an engagement at a hotel in a town that no longer exists, called Selwood. It was quite a booming town at one point, a mining town. And they have an engagement at the hotel. And that night after the engagement, Una displays the strength of her character. I'll read you that passage. Here we go. The next thing that Una knows, she is lying on a bed in one of the hotel rooms. Archie sits beside her, holding a bag of ice to her swollen eye. What happened? Una moans with pain. You don't remember? Archie removes the ice bag. You kicked that drunken Scotsman in the shins and then all hell broke loose. You punched him right in the gut. My word, woman, where did you learn to fight like that? Well, when you grow up with two brothers, you do learn a few tricks, Una admits. There was no stopping you. The air was blue with swearing, Archie adds incredulously. Really? Una feels her swollen eye. You were as fierce as a junkyard dog, teases Archie. Well, he was an ignorant lout, Una says defensively. I tried stepping between the two of you. It was obvious you were going to do some serious damage to the man. He threw a punch at me. Of course I ducked, and he plowed you smack on your proboscis. You ducked? My what? Your nose. What else was I supposed to do? Archie continues. It took the bartender, the band, and two other miners to hold you back. He had it coming, Una mumbles defensively. Just remind me never to get on your wrong side, Archie says with a wink. I love creating the whole atmosphere of Cape Real. I did a lot of research in that area as well. So the latter part of the book takes place in Brockville. And what happens is Angus gets a posting down in Brockville working for the CN. He's a pile driver operator. But then when the Depression comes along, the railroaders are let off. And fortunately, or unfortunately, Angus gets hired to be an oiler on the J.B. King drill boat. During those years in Brockville, Una maintains a relationship with her long-distance friends, with Emily Findlay and with Archie Brentwood. So I'm going to read you a couple of the stories, a couple of the letters, so that you get a feel for what life was like in 1930 in in Brockville when Una and Angus moved there. October 16, 1929. Dear Emily, how are you, my dear friend? Hope you had a lovely Thanksgiving. It has been 3 years since Angus and I moved to Brockville. Can you believe it? Seems like only yesterday you and I were cycling down the road to Parry Sound, treating ourselves to desserts in the cafes. The children are growing like wildfire and are all in school now. The apartment feels a bit empty, but at least I have time to do the things I've been meaning to do. I cleaned out the closets and patched Angus's work pants, and I've taken up pressing flowers again. I used to do that when I lived with Eva Stanton. I made this note card with wildflowers that I collected in the summer. The purple asters turned out well, I think. Most weekends I play for dances with the Riverside Jazz Tones. There is some talk of doing a recording, but we'd have to go to Toronto for that. I'll let you know if it happens. Maybe you could meet me there. Angus can't wait for the winter to come so he can get back to playing hockey. He joined a baseball team this summer, mostly made up of railroaders. In September, they played donkey baseball against the opposing firefighters team as a fundraiser for the hospital. It was hysterical. I laughed so hard I cried. Whenever a batter hit the ball, he had to climb on the back of a donkey and ride it to first base. Angus nearly fell off, but still made it because of a playful fumble by the other team. The children loved it. That and the hot dogs sold at the concession stand. I trust you and Lois have been enjoying the autumn leaves. Drop a line when you can. As always, Una. And here's a letter that she writes to her friend Archie. May 28th, 1930. How are you, my musical friend? What devilment have you been up to this spring? Any plans to come for a visit? I mentioned in my letter to you that Angus is working on a drill boat on the river. They started blasting a few weeks ago. It is quite the undertaking making this channel. Angus tells me that they drill right into the bedrock. Some 25 or 30 feet deep. The noise gives him a headache, especially since he works below deck, keeping the machinery oiled and all. There are 12 drills, and when they are drilling all at the same time, we hear it in town. I'm getting used to it, though. The barge is generally tied up to the nearest landmass, usually an island. They stuff the holes with dynamite and run wires up to the barge. Before they light the fuses, they undo the ropes and chains so that the barge drifts away from the blasting site. Quite the production, if you ask me. Some blasts even rattle the windows in our apartment. We sure are eating a lot of fish. Every day, Angus scoops up a few dead ones left floating after the blast. I mean, how many times can you cook a pike or a bass anyway? Times are getting tough for a lot of folks. At least you have your job at the church and with your band. People still need music, don't they? I purchased a few recordings. Happy days are here again and putting on the Ritz. Nothing like a good song to help us forget these hard times. I'm so thankful that Angus has a job. Keep on the sunny side of life. As always, Una. I love doing the research for this book, and at the back of the book, there's several pages that listing all the resources that I used to be informed. Everything from the songs of the First World War, what people wore, hairstyles, food, washing machines, and other things that create the texture of life in those first 3 decades of the 20th century. I have some some pictures to share with you. So I'm just going to open it up and share the screen. Here we go. And there, I'm clicking on that. I'm hitting share. And now I'm going to start the slideshow for you. Start slideshow from the beginning. There we have it. There's the cover of the book, Unsayable Absence. I struggled so much with what to call the book, because throughout the book, there is an ongoing metaphor of water. Una's born on water on the Lake of Bays. Una goes to work in Parry Sound by the Great Lakes. Una moves up to Cape-Breton by the Vermilion River and then down to the St. Lawrence River. And of course, water represents many things, spiritual things, death, birth, cleansing, and so forth. So I like the image because it shows a really brooding darkness at the bottom, and then the light rising up and out. The title, I couldn't put water in the title, and I came up with Unsayable Absence from a poem by Rumi, who is the mystic poet. It was translated by Coleman Barks. Listen and feel the beauty of your separation. The unsayable absence. Listen and feel the beauty of your separation. The unsayable absence. Let's move along. Let's look at another picture. This is what the Brockville Asylum would have looked like around this time. It was built on a place called Pickens Point. This is a photograph of the Anishinaabe people, or as they were known at that time, the Chippewa. I just, just thinking about what it was like for people like Rachel Littlefeathers, who were displaced people often, and how she survived. This was just an incredible eye-opener to the way of life. This photograph is the actual scow where my grandmother was born. It's hard to imagine that she was born on this scow inside there. Inside that shack, apparently there was even an organ that my great-grandmother would play. You see there's a horse and just the faint shadow of a figure there. This would be my great-grandfather. I'm not sure who this young man is, but I was told this was my grandmother, Bertha May Green. Here they are again. There's the scow with the horse and the lumber, the shack, my great-grandfather. Don't know these young people. This, I'm told by my mother's cousin, Elmer Green, that's Bertha May, my grandmother. And I'm thinking she's probably about 12 years old there. I don't think she's very old. So it's about 1912. It's before the war, anyway. I found this picture online when I was trying to create an atmosphere for Eva Stanton, the herbalist. I love this cottage, and I can just imagine something like that in Baysville. And this little, well, I think it's a cat, but it could be a dog. And in the story, the cat is called Azalea, like the plant. This inside picture of somebody's herb-filled room also helped me paint a picture in my mind of what Eva Stanton's home might have been like. This is a munitions factory as depicted by the war artist Mabel May. She was charged with doing art for the war effort at home in Canada. A fantastic picture. I can almost smell the horrible smell and the deafening sound. I did a lot of research on munition factories in Canada and in Britain, and read about the disastrous explosions that happened and the dangers that the workers, the women, had to endure. This is a boxcar home. Now it's kind of jumbled because I went up to Cape Coral to the Railroad Museum when I did my research about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was closed, but they let me go in. So I was very pleased, and they were just storing things here and there, as you can see. But you can imagine it being quite comfortable to live in. I adore old time sheet music. I have a huge collection of sheet music that I bought in the 70s from the Wetherell Barbershop in Brockville, if anyone knows where that used to be. And I did not collect these pieces, but I found that the sensibility of fashion and mannerisms, and in Unsayable Absence, Una bobs her hair. This is a photograph of my grandfather. This is my grandfather, Jack Wiley, and he is with a group of other people involved in the First World War. And I used to look at this photo and say to myself, is that Versailles? That's got to be Versailles. And then I finally read it, Versailles. This is the J.B. King drill boat. It's a huge structure. You can see how small the men are in comparison to it. And those from the Brockville area might recognize this building as the home of George T. Fulford. I'm pretty sure that's what that is. This is a picture of some of the crew that worked on the J.B. King. And it's quite likely that none of them survived the blast. This, I believe, is my grandfather, Jack Wiley Sr., because I have other photos of him wearing this hat. I recognize his ears from other photographs, and the dog. The dog's name is King, and my grandfather fell through the ice one winter day when they were loading the scow, and the dog jumped in the water and rescued my grandfather. In the work of fiction, in Unsayable Absence, that happens to Angus. I put that in the book. And finally, this is a photograph of my grandmother and my grandfather. That's Jack Wiley Sr. See, there's his ears. What did I tell you? He has a cap. It's not that one, but he always had a cap, it seemed. He was born in England and came over after the Boer War. And my grandmother was born on the scow on Lake Bays. That's Bertha May, and her family name is Green. So that's all I'm going to share for now about Unsayable Absence. I would like to thank the Writers Union of Canada once more for sponsoring this preview launch. It is a preview launch because I'm not really going to do a big push on the book until June, well, the spring leading up to June for the 92nd anniversary of the drill boat explosion. Many friends have already ordered and purchased my book. And if you want to get a copy for yourself, you can do that by ordering online from Friesen Press, F-R-I-E-S-E-N Press, all one word, or you can go to the Amazon.ca, Amazon.com, and order a book. If you do have a book and if you like it, it would be really fun if you took a photograph of yourself reading it or saying, I read this book, and you put it up on Facebook, because that's really going to help me a lot. That whole networking and word of mouth through Facebook is really valuable to helping me promote this book. So thank you again. If you see this video and you want to get hold of me, please do. You can contact me at Tellertogo, T-E-L-L-E-R, the number 2, G-O, @gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.